Mississippi is breaking new ground for business at a historic pace. Amazon, XAI, Toyota, Milwaukee Tool, and GE Aerospace have all tapped into our deep talent pool, prime geographic location, and welcoming communities. This is bigger than megasites. Mississippi offers a thriving business ecosystem with affordability, greater collaboration with energy partners, and record-breaking speed to market. Looking to expand? Break new ground at mississippi.org.
Yay Networks.
In the heat of the summer, it can feel nearly impossible to catch up, to fully replenish and be fully hydrated, especially if we're out there, we're active, we're exercising, we're losing large amounts of sweat. We feel depleted, we feel exhausted, we feel run down. The key of much of that recovery and replenishment is beyond fluid, it is also the electrolytes in there. And today we are talking beyond sports drinks, top sources of electrolyte-rich hydration to help us thrive in the summertime heat. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. As I'm recording this episode, it is the middle of June in New Orleans, and it is not only wildly hot outside, it's also just outrageously humid. So the topic we're talking about today, just how we can replenish those fluids efficiently and maximize this. This is, I feel like, a conversation I'm having with somebody different every single day. People are just sharing, just even in passing, oh my God, I'm exhausted. And it might be 4:00 in the afternoon and someone shares, oh, I'm exhausted. I went for a run this morning and it may have only been, 2 miles or what might be an otherwise short run to them, but they just feel like they can't catch up on their fluid. They're still feeling depleted. I had someone today actually who had a headache, and it's someone who doesn't usually get headaches. And he said, oh, I need to take some Advil. And I said, what's hurting? And a headache. I ran this morning and I just can't catch up. And I think like I'm just still dehydrated from it. Every single day I'm hearing this. So there's going to be two things to keep in mind, two just essential elements of how do we optimize this hydration during the summertime. We're going to talk about what those two are. We'll talk about like the impact of, when we are dehydrated, how does that leave us feeling? It's lethargic, like we talked about, feeling tired. It's muscle cramping. It's headaches, like that friend shared today. There's so many aspects of our wellness that are going to be tied to our hydration. A lot of times someone may be craving carbs or they're craving sugar and they're kind of mindlessly snacking, or they feel like they just can't catch up even food wise. And instinctively our bodies know that when we're feeling tired, we're feeling sluggish, our bodies are, kind of subconsciously might tell us to look for those carbs or those sugars for a pick-me-up, when the reality is we're actually dehydrated. So a lot of times when someone, especially this time of the year, whenever it's just so hot and humid, and someone says, even if you're in other areas and it's hot but not humid, that's a totally different thing, of course, because you're still losing that sweat. It's just not staying on you like it is for us here in South Louisiana. It's evaporating, but it can still be just as critical, and the sweat losses can be just as large. So if someone says, I'm craving carbs or I'm craving sugar, before, or what's wrong with me, like they feel out of control at a certain point, or they're exhausted in the afternoon. One of the first questions I'm always going back to is, how much fluid are you drinking? And sometimes they're just saying, hey, what can I do for more energy? What can I take? Is there a supplement I can take for more energy? And a lot of times, again, it comes back to hydration. That's year round. That's in the winter, or it can be if we're in the AC most of the time, but it's especially critical to be just hyper aware of this during the summertime months, no matter where we are. Also to keep in mind is when we are talking about hydration and we're talking about optimizing hydration, That does not mean we immediately need to reach for that sports drink, and certainly not that sugary sports drink. So, for most people, I am not a fan of traditional sports drinks. For one thing, they are primarily sugar. It might be high fructose corn syrup, or it might be just regular sugar, but they're sugar, and most of them, like if you're looking at a Gatorade or Powerade, they are sugar sweetened, and they also contain artificial food dyes. And so I look for, well, what are some natural alternatives? And we don't even need a sports drink, period. But if that's something that you're interested in and you like the idea of a sports drink, there are a few that I would say. My favorite is actually not even a sports drink. They're like tablets or pouches that you would put into your water bottle. One is called Nuun. It's Nuun. They're little tablets, kind of like little Alka-Seltzer tablets. Each of them gives you about 300 milligrams of sodium, give or take, depending on the specific variety of it. But they're like 1 gram of sugar, 15 calories. They are naturally sweetened with stevia. They have no artificial sweeteners, no artificial food dyes, and they're rich in sodium, 300 milligrams, which seems like, well, wait a second. I thought I'm always trying to watch my sodium. When you're looking for electrolytes, that's what we're looking for. What we're sweating out is sodium. So when we talk about electrolytes, I know I'm going to digress in that space for just a minute. When we're talking about electrolytes, we're talking about sodium, potassium, and calcium, largely. Those are going to be the ones that we're looking at in our bodies as we talk about electrolytes. Potassium, we do lose small amounts of potassium through our sweat and exercise losses. Very, very little calcium, though. It's primarily sodium, salt losses that are in our sweat. And some people are very heavy sweaters. You know, if you're out there, your clothes are drenched. I was out, exercising the other day with a friend of mine, and and also this happens with my husband too. They're both just like mildly damp. There's maybe a little bit of sweat showing through their shirt. Me, on the other hand, I look like I just stepped out of the shower in like my full clothes, just crazy sweating, and it's dripping off of me, and it's flinging off. So for me, it's visible that I am like a very heavy sweater, lots of sweat coming out. For someone else, they may be a very mild sweater. So for me, it's going to also be that much more critical to make sure that I'm having the fluid replenishment, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But when we're talking about, okay, so you have people who are heavy sweaters, and then you have people also who may be salty sweaters. And there's actually technology that can measure the sodium concentration of our sweat. Most of us, myself included, don't have access, this isn't going to be readily available to us to detect just what composition our sweat is and how much sodium is in it. However, if you're sweating and then you go, let's just say, into the air conditioning, and you look down, and let's say you had on like maybe black tights or a black shirt or something, where that sweat dries, you'll often kind of see just like the white powdery look on it. And that's basically those salt crystals drying. And so you can also feel it, the grit on your skin. So if you're sweating and then you go inside and you're just kind of touching your skin, you'll feel that grittiness of that salt. And again, some people are saltier sweaters than others. So back to the Nuun. These are these little tablets. They're kind of like Alka-Seltzer tablets. The Nuun Sport variety is my favorite. Some of their products do have caffeine in it. So just note that if you're purchasing it, and depending on what time of day you're taking it, you may or may not want that boost of caffeine. So the Nuun Sport is my favorite. Again, like I said, 1 gram of sugar, 300 milligrams of sodium, and about 150 potassium. That's like the little tablet you put into your bottle of water, and it kind of makes like your sports drink that you can just carry with you anywhere. The nice thing about that is you can always have it with you, and then all you have to have is your water bottle that you refill or whatever, and you can put the little tablet in it. There's a product also that is local. It's actually, the company is based out of Baton Rouge, and it is called MyHy. It's MYHY. It is actually Matt Flynn, who is a LSU athlete, started this brand, and it's a really good quality brand. So the sugar in these, it's still a decent bit of sugar. It's about 12 grams of sugar. So for someone who does need those extra sugars, those extra carbs, something like MyHy would also work. The sodium in one of these stick packs is even higher, 640. So for someone who is just that mild sweater, you're not really losing much water. You're not doing a whole lot that's, you're feeling a little depleted, but you're not really losing those just large volumes. And especially for someone who is being mindful, does need to be mindful of their sodium intake, maybe for blood pressure issues or whatever that might be. The 640 sodium in here may be a little bit high, but for someone who is an extreme sweater and outside a lot, I recommended and gave a sample of this to a friend of mine who's a tennis coach. He was just exhausted all day long. And I was asking him, what are you drinking? And he was just drinking water all day. And he's out on the court coaching kids, coaching adults all day in the heat and only drinking water. So I was like, we've got to get you something else. So for him, he's very active. He could use that extra 12 grams of sugar per stick pack. He also could use that 640 milligrams of sodium. But someone else, maybe like me, the noon tablets with 300 sodium may be more fitting. So just kind of knowing, okay, thinking about looking at the product that you're considering and, well, how much sodium is it, and kind of what's a nice frame of reference there. Many sports drinks, like a traditional Gatorade or something like that, may have like 110 sodium, just for reference. There is a low sugar sports drink that I do like. It's called Body Armor Light, Lyte. You can get it at stores like Target or Walmart. Coca-Cola, it's under the Coca-Cola product line. And I like it because the whole bottle of it is only 20 calories. Same thing, it's very low sugar, like just 2 grams of sugar, 0 added sugar, no artificial anything, food dyes or sweeteners or anything like that. The but I would say about this, it's a pro or a con, depending on who you are. It has 40 milligrams of sodium. So it's really low sugar, completely natural, Body Armor Light. You can find it at Walmart, Target, all kinds of just like regular stores because it's under the Coca-Cola product line. The but is that it's 40 milligrams of sodium. So for my friend, the tennis coach, who I was telling y'all about just now, who's just losing these large volumes of sweat, 40 milligrams of sodium probably isn't quite enough. He's better with those My High packets that are going to give him over 600. But for the person, the other one that we're kind of giving the example of, maybe they're just, kind of doing a lower intensity walk, or they're losing some sweat, but not just crazy amounts. And also perhaps for that person who does need to be mindful of their sodium intake because of blood pressure, et cetera, then this product would be really good. So I hope that makes sense. We've got something like My High, which has a little bit of sugar, heavy sodium, is going to be great for that athlete who's losing large amounts. So also if you're talking about kids who may be doing 2-a-days, during, training for football, you've got someone who's training for a triathlon. They're doing, they're training in the morning and the evening. You've got someone like the tennis coach I was telling you about. That is their life. Someone like our friend who's the mailman and he's walking, Damon's walking all the time out here in the heat. He's just like, there's no way he's losing so much volume of sweat. So something like that might be fitting for them. And then the person who's the recreational exerciser, losing a little bit of sweat, but not so much, and or also needs to consider sodium needs, that Body Armor Light could be a good fit. Enough about the sports drinks. I actually really wanted to talk, though, beyond sports drinks, because it doesn't have to be a sports drink to keep us hydrated. For me personally, that's not my preference. I'll use the noons if I need to get that extra dose of sodium, but my preference is to get my electrolytes through other sources. And then a lot of times my fluid choice is going to be just pure water. So with that, there's 2 things to consider. Number 1, how much water do we need, or how much fluid do we need? And then 2, what are these other sources of electrolytes that we're talking about besides or beyond sports drinks? So starting with that first question, how much water do I need? I always replace the phrase water with fluid, because any type of fluid that doesn't contain alcohol counts towards our fluid intake. And while there's some exceptions, a general rule of thumb for people is when we look at, what's my baseline hydration needs? How much fluid do I need just on an average day? Take your body weight, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces of fluid we need in a day. So you've got someone who is 160 pounds. Divided by 2, that's 80. That's 80 ounces of fluid a day. And you may say, oh my gosh, that is 10 cups. It doesn't necessarily need to be 10 cups of water. It's 80 ounces of fluid. So if you're drinking a smoothie, if you have even coffee or tea, or certainly herbal tea, if you're having anything that is liquid at room temperature, even fruits, the water content of fruits and vegetables counts towards our fluid intake. Things like yogurt or cottage cheese, these are all going to contribute to hydration for us. So taking your body weight divided by 2, that's how many ounces we need during a day as our baseline. So kind of tuck that away. That would be like if you were inside in the AC the majority of the time, not really losing any sweat through exercise or outdoor activity. Then, if you're going to be doing outdoor activity, it could even be whatever it is that you're doing outside on a regular basis or exercise, a couple of times step on the scale before and then after. And especially during this time of the year, because the sweat losses you have during the summertime are probably going to be vastly different from what you're seeing in the winter, especially depending on where you live and kind of what the outdoor conditions are. So I mentioned earlier that with my friend who I was working out the other day with, or my husband, I look like I just stepped out of the shower. My clothes are just completely saturated. They're sticking to me. They're just completely soaked. For them, they're just like high and dry. So if we were each to step on the scale before and after to see how much sweat have we lost, often I might have lost 3 or 4 or 5 pounds of sweat. 3 is kind of an average on something like that. It doesn't mean I've lost 3 pounds of body fat. It doesn't mean, oh man, I wish I could lose 3 pounds in a workout session. That's not what we're talking about at all. That's 3 pounds that I'm dehydrated. And it's not fat. It's not weight. It's not weight that you want to lose. It's 3 pounds of water that I am now deficient in. So when you look at, 16 ounces is a pound. So if I am down 3 pounds of water, 3 times 16 is 48. That means I need an additional 48 ounces on top of my baseline needs. So your body weight divided by 2, that's how many ounces you need as your baseline. If you're 160 pounds, 80 ounces, and that just gets you coasting through the day. Then you're doing a spin class, or you're doing a boot camp class, or you're running each morning, or whatever it might be. Step on the scale before and after a couple of times and just see how much weight are you losing in sweat during that exercise. And you need to replenish that much more. Again, keeping in mind that 16 ounces is a pound. So that's just a really easy formula of how we need to do it to kind of just figure out. Now, is there going to be some variation for people? Yeah, but that'll at least kind of give you like a ballpark. So going back to the topic of, okay, well, beyond sports drinks, what types of foods can we turn to for those electrolytes? And I mentioned that sports drinks just aren't my favorite thing. I don't really enjoy them. It's not something that I want to just have. It's not something that's just satisfying to me to drink just through the day to get those electrolytes. So just for example, I've mentioned to y'all before that I've been learning how to play tennis and just really working on my strokes. And I like going out there and just like hitting the ball and, using that also as just like a really fun workout opportunity. It also means high energy and tremendous sweat losses. So one of the things that I like that I'll have on the way out there is that I found just really works well for me and I've mentioned before, if y'all are interested, scroll back. We did a podcast on tech and our health, like technology and our health. And I talked about my experience with a continuous glucose monitor. And I was just fascinated that this snack that I'm about to share with y'all, the pre-workout snack, worked really well to sustain my blood sugar levels throughout an hour and a half of like a high intensity workout. So what that is for me is an almond flour tortilla and a slice of like provolone cheese. And so it doesn't, that's how I first look at that as it's got enough fat in it. It has some protein. It has a bit of carb. It gives me energy and it keeps those glucose levels stable. When I was having another option before that, I was having a higher carb option before a workout like that. And then I was feeling depleted. And I saw on the continuous glucose monitor that my blood sugars were plummeting. So I switched to the cheese on this almond flour tortilla, which was lower carb. It's only about 10 grams of carbs, but it actually, for me, sustained my energy and sustained the glucose levels the entire way through. So it was a huge learning experience for me. So if you want to know more about that and the continuous glucose monitor, scroll back. You'll hear that on the one that is about technology and its influence on our health. Back to the sodium though. So on this, one tortilla has about 110 milligrams of sodium, and then a slice of the cheese has about 170. So this cheese melted on tortilla, fold it over, make it kind of like a little quesadilla, is going to give me about 280 milligrams of sodium. That's about the same as that 300 that we talked about in that little noon electrolyte tab. So for me, I'll have something like this right before a workout. It digests well. It doesn't, I'm not feeling like it's kind of sitting too high or anything like while I'm working out. It digests well. It fuels my body well. The whole thing kind of works for me. And it's giving me that sodium, that punch of sodium, and then also potassium from the cheese before that workout. And then I'm just drinking water through that intense workout. So that's just one example. It could also be if someone loves, like, let's just say a turkey sandwich. You've got like some sort of like natural sliced turkey. It's regardless, even like a low sodium turkey is still going to have a good bit of sodium in it. You pair that with a piece of cheese and you make a sandwich or a little fold over sandwich. If you're doing something like cottage cheese and fresh fruit, and the fruit is your carbs, the cottage cheese is your protein, and that's supposed to work out. If you have a string cheese and some Triscuits, and that's your pre-workout. I think I said post-workout a bit, but pre-workout I meant. All of those things are going to also give us that sodium, which is essentially the electrolyte that we're looking for. So there's really several times that we want to kind of consider when are we having these electrolytes for if you know you're going to have that extended workout coming up. I would try to have that source of carb and protein, kind of like that little quesadilla I mentioned, or again, cottage cheese and fruit, or whole grain cracker and cheese, or, if you're doing something like, let's say a Greek yogurt smoothie. Greek yogurt is actually really low in sodium. And so you may be doing that with fresh fruit, just hypothetically. Do a little bit of sea salt, sprinkle a little bit of sea salt in there before you blend it to give you that extra boost of sodium. A lot of the pre-made protein drinks. So, there's Orgain has a ready-to-drink protein drink that has 240 milligrams of sodium. So the pre-made protein drinks often, not always, but often are sodium rich. But if you're using something like Greek yogurt or often a protein powder and you're blending that, depending on what type of milk you use, you may or may not be getting, or if you are using a milk, milk or almond milk, you may or may not be getting sodium in there. So if you're using an almond milk that is also giving you some sodium, well, there you go. But if you're using Greek yogurt and fresh fruit, and maybe that was your pre-workout, that's actually pretty low sodium. So take a look at if you're having that pre-workout fuel source that's going to give you that carbs and protein, take a look to see, okay, is it also giving me some of that sodium? And then during that workout, so if that workout is an hour, in my case, I'm probably right on the cusp that having that sodium before and then just drinking water through my workout, I'm probably right on the cusp. If that workout was much longer, I would need to switch to adding something like noon in there to give me more sodium through. So if your workout is about an hour and you're eating, that carb and protein and sodium source before, you're probably okay during your workout. If you're doing an extended, let's say long distance ride or run, then we're going to need to make sure you're getting that sodium in your hydration source throughout. But for most of us, if it's a 30-minute, 45 or, up to an hour workout, most of us will be okay with water, especially if we're getting that electrolyte fuel source before. And then after is going to also be important. We want to replenish those fluids that we lost. Again, that idea of stepping on the scale a couple of times before and after, and wow, how many pounds of sweat am I losing during this workout? We want to replace that fluid. And then we also want to replace the electrolytes. So after a workout, if you're like, well, I love drinking that noon and I got the sodium and fluid there, you're great. If you really just want to drink water though after your workout, then we've got to make sure you're eating something that's going to, or taking in another source that's going to give you electrolytes. I keep saying cottage cheese because it's a great source of it. It could be that turkey sandwich. It could be like your leftover grilled chicken and broccoli and a sweet potato, like whatever it is that's going to give you some naturally occurring salt. One thing that I also like, and for some reason, it doesn't appeal to me as much before or during. And when you hear this, you're not going to be like, for some reason, you're going to be like, I know exactly why it doesn't appeal to you. But after a workout, it actually seems really appealing to me. And that is something like bone broth. And you can get bone broth that is chicken sourced or beef bone broth. And there's bone broth you can find it in like little ready to drink cartons. They actually have like a pour spout and it's resealable. It could be used for cooking, but it could also be used to drink out of. Sort of like the individual, like little milk, kind of like a little 4-pack of different types of milks that would have the little pour spout and resealable. They make those with bone broth. There's also different packets. Same thing, like the idea of a sports drink packet that you would add to your water bottle. Same concept, and it's bone broth. So I did this topic as a WGNO segment just recently also. And Brooke Laser, who I do the segments with, she's the host with me. She was dying at this. She's like, oh my God, who wants to drink this? I'm like, it's actually just like sipping broth. A lot of people, it's kind of like maybe a little bit like the pho part of, if someone loves Vietnamese food, it would just be, it's not any different than if you were sick and you just wanted chicken broth or sipping the broth from a chicken noodle soup. The bone broth, why I like that is it's higher protein. It's collagen-rich protein in the broth. And so looking for beef or chicken bone broth, and you can buy it pre-made. You could also make it yourself, but buying it pre-made for a lot of people is going to be the easier way to go. You can buy it in a large carton, a large jar. You can find it in the freezer section in pouches. You can find it in these single-serve little packets that you would add to a water bottle. There's so many different ways. And so that's going to be a really salty, savory fluid replenisher. And so for me, that may not be what I'm looking at before or during exercise, but after, it can feel really, really satisfying. Another to share with y'all in the same kind of vein of that is pickle juice. And we'll talk about pickle juice in two separate ways. One would be having it specifically as for your electrolytes. And so there's pickle juice that you can buy. Of course, if you were buying a jar of pickles and you left the juice and kind of sipped it out of the jar there, you also can buy pickle juice that is bottled in like these small little 2-ounce bottles that is just specifically only pickle juice for kind of specifically for muscle cramping or things like this. And so it's roughly about 100 milligrams of sodium per ounce. So if you drink 2 ounces or 3 ounces of pickle juice, roughly 200 to 300 milligrams of sodium. So if you just Google like pickle juice there and you're looking kind of at like even Amazon or in stores, you'll see there's a brand that just says it's called pickle juice. There's also a brand called Van Holten's, and they have kind of like freezer pops that you would have like, strawberry or kind of the old school freezer pops that were like liquid in the long skinny pouches. And then you would stick them in the freezer and then like pull the little top off of it and have like your push up freezer pop. It's that, but it's pickle juice. And so these are literally just pickle juice. There's no sugar added or anything. And each of these pouches is a couple of ounces worth, but when you're freezing it, then it becomes like much more like a little ice pop. And each of those has about 320 milligrams of sodium. So same thing here. That's not really what I'm looking for before I'm going to have that intense exercise, but it actually could feel really refreshing after some of those, workouts where you're just losing really large amounts of sweat. The other thing to note, and we've talked about this before on this podcast, but I think it's for those who haven't heard, or even if you have and you've kind of forgotten it, it's worth hearing it again. When we talk about pickle juice for muscle cramping, so pickle juice can be effective almost instantaneously to relieve a muscle cramp like a Charlie horse. So you've got your calf and it's just excruciatingly painful and the nerves are just spasming. The muscle spasms are just like so intense. Pickle juice can relieve this almost immediately within seconds. And for that reason, it was like, well, that can't be just the sodium in pickle juice because otherwise other really salty food or drink could have the same impact just as quickly, and they don't seem to. Also, our bodies aren't, digesting or absorbing. That sodium isn't entering our body, going through, being absorbed, being distributed to where it's actually helping to relieve that muscle spasm or that muscle cramp. So what happens when these nerves are just like all bunched up and we're experiencing that spasm? What's actually happening with pickle juice is there's a compound in pickle juice that is called acetic acid. It's in other types of vinegar, like also something like apple cider vinegar. But pickle juice is what has had, I guess, the research behind it. And so this acetic acid actually, as we're sipping it or as we're drinking it, it's hitting certain nerve receptors in our throat that are immediately sending that nerve impulse to basically calm down that muscle spasm. So it's not the salt in pickle juice that is causing the relief of that muscle cramp. It's actually the acetic acid triggering that response, triggering that nerve impulse to immediately tell those muscles to stop being just so bunched up and cramped up. So that's kind of an interesting thing, an interesting note about pickle juice. And it's really just an ounce or two. Many people can find relief. And that's especially like that really intense cramping, like what we would call a Charlie horse. I've also had some people tell me that they've experienced relief with restless leg syndrome. So at night, if they have restless leg syndrome and they have those little bottles of pickle juice I was telling y'all about that you can get from the store or online, they're like little 2-ounce bottles. I've had people tell me they keep that kind of in their nightstand or by their bed, and then they have that and it helps to relieve it. So you may be listening and you're like, there's no way I am going to sleep with pickle juice on the nightstand. It's whatever works, different things just to be aware of when we're talking about these vague terms. We need to replenish our fluid. We need to make sure that we're optimally hydrated. We need to get electrolyte-rich fluids. Well, what does that mean? Electrolyte-rich, when we're talking about sweat losses and replenishing sweat losses, the electrolytes that we're looking for in those electrolyte-rich replacers specifically is going to be sodium. Some potassium is great. Some calcium is great, but those are just kind of like extras. It's really going to be sodium that is going to have that most impact on muscle cramping and recovery. So when we talk about electrolyte-rich fluid, we're talking largely sodium, with, again, little potassium, little calcium, and then also the other part of that, fluid. So the other things that we talked about, for me, like I said, I choose to eat those foods that are going to give me the sodium, the electrolytes there, and largely I'll turn to mostly just water when possible. If it's going to be extended duration, I'll add something like a Noon tablet, NUUN, to a sports drink or to a water bottle to kind of create that low sugar sports drink effect. But when we're talking about fluids, it could be water. It could be water with something like a Noon tablet or a My High packet added to it. When we're talking about fluids, it could be that low sugar, lower sodium sports drink like Body Armor Light. It could also be a protein drink. It could be one that you're making at home with Greek yogurt or protein powder. Take a look at what you're mixing it with. If it's unsweetened almond milk that's giving you a decent dose of sodium, you're good to go. If you've been mixing it with water, though, you may not be getting enough sodium in that if you're using it as a pre-workout or post-workout recovery. Also, things like bone broth are going to serve to hydrate us. And it doesn't have to just be pure bone broth. It could be your favorite soup from your favorite Japanese restaurant or Thai restaurant or Vietnamese restaurant. Those are all going to give us the liquid, the fluid, and they're also going to give us the sodium. So again, electrolyte-rich fluid could also be, your favorite soup, your favorite broth-based soup. And then when we keep, kind of just in that fluid conversation, tea, herbal tea, these are all still going to hydrate us really well. And if we are having these, then we need to make sure, and we're also looking to make sure that we're staying well hydrated in and around the workouts and the sweat losses. If we're just replenishing with fluids like that, though, we've got to look and see where am I getting those electrolytes. So the bottom line on all of this is to take that assessment. First kind of take a step back and assess, what do my sweat losses look like? Am I one who is a heavy sweater or am I a light sweater? And then if you can determine if you are a heavy sweater, do you feel that grittiness, that graininess kind of on your skin after, or do you see it, that white powdery dried on your clothes after? Then you're also probably a salty sweater. And you'll also know if you have just been feeling depleted, run down, wiped out after you're exercising in the heat. So the first is to just assess that, what's your status, what's your starting point? And then the next is to see, well, how much fluid am I taking in through the day? So how much fluid, period. And again, remembering that smoothies count and anything really that's kind of liquid at room temperature counts. How much fluid am I taking in? And then what's the electrolyte content of that? And when we say that, that translates to what's the sodium content in that. And so if you realize that, oh, wow, I am doing a lot of things that are going to, sports drinks or whatever, low sugar sports drinks that are giving me lots of sodium, or you're doing mostly water or herbal tea or sparkling waters and things that don't really have much sodium, then we want to also flip and look at food. Well, what foods am I eating in and around my workout? Are those giving me a decent bit of sodium? So something as simple as your pre-workout or post-workout has been fresh fruit and Greek yogurt. If you're a salty sweater, you may want to switch that to fresh fruit and cottage cheese, because cottage cheese has so much more sodium than the Greek yogurt does. So just taking a look, taking that assessment. I'm going to link to a lot of other sources for this. So I've done a podcast with expert Bob Murray. He is just a tremendous researcher and expert on all things related to fluid, hydration, electrolytes. And he and I did an entire podcast called The Science of Muscle Cramping. And I've written articles on this topic. Something I didn't talk about really on this, but I'll just link to it, is Pedialyte. It's not my favorite source of electrolytes compared to all these other things we've talked about. So spoiler alert on that, but I'll link to that for you guys. I'll link to some of the TV segments we've done recently so that you can see these products also that we're talking about. So this is sort of just a snapshot. It's actually, in looking at the time clock as I'm recording this, I thought this was going to be like a 20-minute podcast and just kind of hitting the high spots on some of this with y'all. But we still, there's a lot to cover on this, and there's even more, so much more than what we've even, started to peel away here. So I'll link to all of that if you're wanting more information about the science of muscle cramping, learning more about electrolytes, fluids, what ratios, even talking more about the science behind these things. I will link to those in our episode notes. As always, let me know what you think, what your takeaway is from this. And also if you have different electrolyte-rich fluid replacers that have been working for you, I want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.